Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this timely discussion about our First Amendment rights. My name is Matthew Foley, and I'm the Debate and Oratory Chair of the Jefferson Literary and Debating Society. Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of the Society, I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's forum on free speech. In addition to being the Debate and Oratory Chair, I'm also an intern at the Center for Politics, the Society's sponsoring partner for the evening. Our other partner is the Blue Ridge Center. Now, before we begin, I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's event. Jeff Shapiro is the newest scholar at UVA's Center for Politics. Prior to that, he covered Virginia government and politics for 45 years. First for the United Press International, then Virginia Business Magazine, and for nearly 40 years for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. For nearly 30 years, Mr. Shapiro was a contributor to The Economist, the British news magazine, writing on Southern politics and culture. And since 2001, he has appeared Friday mornings on Virginia Public Radio, most recently on Roanoke-based Radio IQ. He has been honored by the Virginia Press Association for his reporting on the political influences of the state's tobacco industry and attempts to dismantle Virginia's monopoly on liquor sales. He is a member of the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Mass Communications Hall of Fame and the Virginia Capital Correspondence Association Hall of Fame. A native of New York City, Mr. Shapiro graduated from Georgetown with a bachelor's degree in history. So ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for our moderator, Mr. Jeff Shapiro.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for having me. This is my first official activity in behalf of the center, so if a little bit of stage fright comes through, forgive me. Just think of the band, that great song. Sometimes I think coming up to the University of Virginia, from which my wife was graduated, at least these days, regardless of one's perspective, on the right or the left, it's sort of the scene of the crime. The point being that both conservatives and liberals feel that when it comes to the First Amendment, maybe things are not fully practiced here. At Mr. Jefferson's university, nonetheless, of course, his friend Madison is responsible for the First Amendment. But I think the purpose of this discussion, if I may invoke a line crafted by an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, I think the purpose of this conversation is sort of to yell fire in a crowded theater. And I would hope that we might be able to do that with a variety of perspectives. Let me introduce the panel first. To my immediate left, and I'm sure he's uncomfortable sitting to my left given his known conservative predilections, is Jared Alexander, like myself, Jesuit trained, a graduate of Georgetown University, Collegii Georgiopolitanum. It's one of the few universities that still issues an undergraduate degree in Latin. He's specialist in comparative...
I am too Jewish to speak Latin.
Well, I didn't know. You're a member of the tribe? Okay. Well, that should tell you something about the direction of this conversation. There's a joke among Jews: 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Anyway, Mr. Alexander has taught at the university since 1997. He's tenured professor in the Department of Politics since 2002. A specialist in comparative politics, especially Western Europe, a fairly active place these days. He has written extensively. I've seen his work, and I've sort of chuckled over some of your observations in such publications as the New York Times, the Claremont Review. I particularly remember a piece you wrote that I think has been generating some conversation of late about how disparaging liberals are of conservatives. And I want to say the piece that you wrote for the Times, it was in 2020 that you suggested that this might actually contribute to a Trump re-election. You don't get everything right. Also,
That's enough. For me.
Okay. Sherry Moore, a product of Hopewell, Virginia.
Yes. Yeah.
The town that DuPont created.
My grandfather worked for.
Right, and she is descended from an important Hopewell family, the Elitis families. Was your father and your uncle
Yes.
Homer and Plato?
Got it.
Practice,
Greek boys, can you-
practice
yeah.
law together? And if I'm correct, were something of wheels in what passed for democratic politics back then, the likes of Hardaway Marks, those great characters. A graduate of the University of Virginia, University of Richmond Law School, practiced, I gather, for 20 years, this is what I'm told, and you're on the McIntyre faculty, and renowned for your last lecture in which you draw on, shall we say, the traumas that shape life and how actually some good can come from them. And this was inspired by the death of your husband and your mother, I believe.
Correct.
The student participants here, Jackson Chiaka, a fourth year, studying economics, minoring in history, also the coxswain on the crew programs. So I'm sure you'll be, keeping your oars going tonight. You're also the chair of the Ways and Means Committee of the Jefferson Society, which I think is a fancy way of saying you're responsible for raising money.
A little different. I'm our party chair.
Okay. Sophia Peretti, a Richmonder, by the way, and a graduate of the Maggie Walker Governor's School, and also active in the Model UN.
I try to be less active than I usually am.
Okay. I'm hoping that I'll just ask a couple of questions to kind of get things started, but this is really your evening, and I think that the panelists, I know I feel this way, are much more interested in taking your questions, engaging you directly. But first off, in the spirit of shouting fire in a crowded theater, of course, the university is considering, shall we say, an arrangement with the Trump administration, which has, and I say this as a First Amendment guy, potentially profound implications for who can say what on grounds. I'm wondering if we'll start with, I think maybe we'll start with the students first. And I'll defer to Sophia. What is your take on this compact? In particular, this feature that has raised concerns of conservatives and liberals as preemptive when it comes to 1A, First Amendment rights, as exercised by students, administration, and faculty.
Yeah, so for those of you who haven't had the chance to look over the compact, I think sort of the main feature that's drawing a lot of potential criticism or worry from a First Amendment perspective is there's a section that says that you need to have institutional neutrality in all of your institutions. That includes departments and programs. It specifically says that universities are not allowed to, I believe it's punish, belittle, or incite violence against conservative ideas. I would say here, obviously, I do not think that a public university should be punishing or obviously not inciting violence against certain ideas. I think it's very problematic for academic freedom, the idea of belittling ideas, the idea that a department, there's something I think that word is probably, at least for my sensitivities, a bit too vague to ensure that it's only punishing First Amendment violations. I would also say, I think a concern of a lot of students, including myself, the idea that the university was sort of chosen for this. All of the universities that were chosen, it was only 9 in total, are universities whose board and whose president have kind of had a history of acquiescing.
Now, one would observe that the University of Virginia is not exactly operating from a position of strength on this matter.
Yeah, I think I disagree. At the Faculty Senate meeting last week, President Mahoney said he was glad that we had the choice to choose whether or not to agree. I would fundamentally disagree with this. I think, first of all, it shows that the University of Virginia is, by the federal government, not being perceived as, I would like to think, sort of the bastion of academic freedom and self-governance that we perceive ourselves as and have historically. I also think that fundamentally the idea of the federal government imposing such detailed and kind of like the minutia of these restrictions is very problematic as a state university. I mean, we have them going over like the grading standards, for instance, in classes, which altogether to say, I think that if this is to be adopted, it poses a severe threat to the academic freedom that all public universities should pride themselves on, and especially that we at the University of Virginia should.
Sherry Moore is a member of the faculty
Yes.
and one associated with ideas and views that maybe represent an attitude that could be described as believing in life after birth. What's your take?
It was, I would say for me, it was shocking, right, to see the overreach of the federal government. Routinely, conservative parties have been, states' rights, states obviously doing what they want, but this is a very chilling compact that would take away all of our academic freedom, not all, but the essence of our academic freedom. The chilling effect, I mean, I would be afraid to say anything, right, which means I'd have no ability, obviously.
But isn't that the point?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no question. Yeah. And the sad part is that it's being tied to funds, right, to getting federal funding is, to me, just disgusting. It feels like extortion if we don't play along. Now, they didn't say you won't
I
get
think
it.
the
It's like
dean
you'll
of
be
the
preferred.
The California at Berkeley Law School actually described it as extortion.
Yeah. And I look at it this way. They're saying, you be preferred. Well, I love Pennsylvania's response. Their response right away was, we don't want to be preferred. We want to be like everybody else. We want to do it on the merits. That should be our response.
Jackson, I'm going to give you a go, and then we'll close with you, Mr. Alexander.
Absolutely. I think the University of Virginia is unique. And to say that, I want to take us back to our founding, the building of the academical village. A big part of our university is this idea that we are a community of learners. It is not meant to be instructors instruct students and students learn from instructors. It's we learn from each other. The faculty members sitting next to me are meant to be my peers in the design of this university. I take particular issue with Section 4 of this compact, which essentially says that faculty members cannot, as faculty members, take any stance that could be viewed as political or some kind of opinion on a current events issue. How can we learn from each other if we can't have those conversations? There are faculty members I agree with, there are faculty members I disagree with. It is implicitly important to the mission of this university that we can have conversations even when we disagree. Politics are part of our history, right? How could we study a thing like history or politics if we make no reference to current events? I'm sorry, we don't study history and politics so that we can change the past. We study them so that we can change the present and the future, and if we ignore the present, we can't do that.
I just would note that the language in the compact, provision 4, on institutional neutrality, university employees in their capacity as university representatives will abstain from actions or speech relating to societal and political events except in cases in which external events have a direct impact upon the university. Mr. Alexander?
That particular provision, and I understand, heaven knows why you're concerned, and we all should be, is a great example of, I think, how these things, ought to work. I'm a big supporter of institutional neutrality for universities and university leadership and representatives. I don't see why universities and private schools, of K through 12 schools, should be weighing in on wars abroad and cutting-edge issues in front of the Congress and so on and so forth. I just think it's to be drawn into just a swamp of just invite activism and pressure on schools to speak to this or that, or get mad if they speak to this or that in a certain way or don't. And yet, I think that's a prime example of something that should be a choice made by that institution and that leadership. And I think I personally, if I were a university president or a dean of a school or head of a K through 12 school, I would choose to be institutionally neutral. I think it's an excellent policy stance. I just don't think that, like so many other things, that's something that should be forced on you by either state or federal government.
I'm wondering, given there is an interim president, maybe he's interested in making this a permanent position. I know that he is installing a panel, an advisory panel, kind of a work committee to look this over. Is this a decision maybe best left to whoever the permanent president may be? Would the interim president be needlessly tying the hands of the university by putting this in place before the Board of Visitors has a chance to make Decision on a new president?
I just don't know what timeline the administration is offering them. If a response is expected sooner, we don't know what the timeline is for getting a new, non-interim president. And I wouldn't be surprised if, the federal government, like with so many things, takes forever to act, and then when it acts, insists on immediacy and urgency. So I have no idea whether they feel they have enough slack to choose that way. I just don't know.
Straymour is making notes.
Yes, I'm curious as to whether it will be the interim president who makes or the new president or the board, the BOV, obviously, whether they will obviously make that final decision as to whether we commit to such a compact. But I agree that it seems like a lot to ask an interim president to a decision that he would make that binds all of us.
I have a question just as an observer, and I'm drawing largely on the experience I've had with students, and I would be interested in some of the views of the audience as well, that in regard to advocacy, given some of the very difficult issues that have been thrashed out in Charlottesville in general and on university grounds in particular, is the problem the problem is not this is my impression that you have professors who are somehow indoctrinating students. My impression has always been that there's always a certain amount of social pressure, particularly present for students, and that it's the students who are often feeling isolated and ostracized by a preponderance of views, whether it's a campus that's distinct in its conservatism or a campus distinct in its liberal views. Is that a reasonable approximation of the case at UVA? Or, excuse me, Mr. Alexander, are there members of the faculty, and I'd ask Mrs. Morris as well, who are given to indoctrination?
Look, I think there's heterogeneity. There's heterogeneity in the faculty like in any population. There are students who would shun you if you don't agree with them. There are lots of students who wouldn't. There are faculty who seem to, find it difficult to resist the impulse to preach from the podium, and there are lots of ones who don't. There are ones who intervene, if they do, in a sort of thoughtful way and invite dissent, and there are ones who seem less indulgent of disagreement. So I think there probably is not a really great generalization to make. I would say that there are contexts in which it really can be kind of stifling. So let me just mention two quick things. One is anecdotal. I guess they're technically both anecdotal. One, I was recently talking to the head of a school in the DC area, a K through 12 school, and the new head of this school had established a policy whereby the teachers on her faculty, are not supposed to sort of take positions in their capacity as a K through 12 teacher on some sort of very cutting political issue. Now, if they're teaching a social studies class, nothing wrong with them having a conversation about it, debate about it. But it's another to say, whether it's through a T-shirt you wear or a sort of just advocacy in front of the classroom. The argument of this head of school was that it just establishes, it has a kind of chilling effect in the room. You're telling students in like 7th grade that this is what the person grading you, how they feel about this. And the chances that that's going to invite free thought and free discussion, it seems a little bit idealistic, right? And secondly, and also I guess anecdotally, a staggering percentage of students I've ever talked to about this kind of thing all believe that, I'd be very curious to take a poll of the undergrads in the room, seem to believe that one of the best ways to get a good grade is to agree with the professor. Now, I could not tell you whether that's accurate, but I know very few students who haven't operated on that assumption. And I find it hard to believe that they all believe that completely incorrectly. I like to think I invite and enjoy somebody disagreeing with me, but I'm no more capable than anyone else of knowing that sometimes I might like to hear what I like to hear. And I worry about that in teachers and faculty, and I have heard just too many students deliberately say I strategically misrepresent what I think so that I don't jeopardize my grade. And that's not a happy place to be.
Well, then I would ask the students on the panel, have you been sucking up to your professors?
Notice,
good grades.
Notice, the concern I just raised is not properly fixed by the Department of Justice, right? That's just not how to get at that.
But the question stands to students regarding this notion of pressure, of social ostracization, because there's a dominant or particularly high decibel point of view that's dominant in the classroom.
Can I mischievously phrase this, take a page from the leaf from the book of survey research? Not to ask the students, do you think you should trim your sails?
Yeah.
Do you know other students who believe they should trim their sails to make sure to get a better grade?
It's hilarious. Do you know other students who've sucked up to professors
Well,
in the
when you
interest
phrase
of,
it that
of a
way.
good grade?
Yeah.
I would say I certainly know of students who have done that, but I don't think I've certainly never experienced myself a professor
No.
grading I would never suck up to a
Right.
professor. I mean, in terms of, in terms of being graded differently because of the views I express, that's never happened to me personally, and I've never heard of it actually happening to everyone. I think it's a real grave concern that people are sort of preemptively self-censoring, but I think that's a very different issue to address than teachers actively discriminating based on viewpoints, which is, of course, First Amendment violation.
All right, Jackson, put your oar in the water.
Yeah, I'd like to address two things. Firstly, I understand the comparison to K through 12 schools, but we're adults, and those are not. And I think there's a distinct difference between K through 12 teachers expressing political viewpoints and college professors expressing viewpoints. Right? I don't think the intent in a K through 12 school is to have kind of equal ground of discussion. Right? These teachers are literally in the place of parents taking care of these children in those moments. There is a different power difference there that does not exist. Now, I will say, absolutely, many of my peers feel a need to censor themselves at this university. However, I don't think something like that compact is the correct answer. What I think is, and I'll give an example. I take a class right now on immigration history. Obviously, like somebody mentioned screaming fire in a crowded theater, right? Like, I think we can acknowledge this is a very hot button issue that's very controversial. And the first thing that our professor said in our first lecture is that some of her best students from different racial backgrounds, with different immigration status, with different socioeconomic backgrounds, on either side of the political aisle, who had very different ideas about how immigration in this country should look, on both sides have been some of her best students, right? She wasn't forced to say that. She made a conscious decision as an educator to be a more effective educator to do that, and it was extremely valuable. I don't believe that if we tell professors, you have to say to these students, I'm non-biased, the students are gonna buy that. What really meant a lot to me is that was genuine. That was that professor saying this because she believed it and because she wanted to. And so I can go into that class now and know this is what is being said to me by my professor, by my instructor. Every professor at this university could say, I'm non-biased, I will never show bias. And then they could turn around and show bias. And so I fear that if we agree to this compact and we really say, like, we're gonna create institutional rules that say professors have to say this, or they can't address these issues in these ways, that won't change the bias, and that won't change the perspective. What can change the perspective is professors making a conscious decision and a conscious effort to address these problems head on. And I was very happy in that course this semester to have a professor who did that.
Professor Moore.
Yeah, Jackson, awesome. And I do have to start with I wholeheartedly think that sucking up to your professor is a very good idea. Just saying.
That's why you're my favorite professor.
There you go. See, okay, everything. So yeah, no, I think one of the biggest problems I have is the censorship goes both ways. I mean, I know that when I stand up and I want to say something, I have to zip it, thinking, you know, don't want to go there, don't want to offend anybody. And then I think later, wait, why didn't I throw that out so we could have the discussion? And I mean, teach a
Is there a
constitutional.
greater likelihood that you're practicing self-censorship on these grounds at this time?
I think it's just, I've heard so much about students not feeling comfortable, and I know I was never comfortable, and I was always, you know, quiet in class. I didn't want it. I think most students self-censor themselves because they're not sure what they're saying yet, right? So I know that I can say any questions, and you see this, not sure yet, right? And I think getting to that, you know, point where the professor's going to take some retaliatory action against you, I mean, those are the kinds of things as a university need to be exposed, right? Because I do think that it's easy enough for me to say to my students, okay, I'm going to say this in my constitutional law class. I'll say, you know, we're going to talk about this side, but I want you to know this isn't the right side. This is just what the court said, and I'm looking at it, right, as, you know, the law now. But you tell me if you disagree, and encouraging them to say it's okay to disagree. But that's gonna, and I think Jackson kind of alluded to that, it's gotta happen with each professor. You've gotta encourage them to say, what they think and know that you're not going to obviously punish them for saying something that you don't obviously believe in.
The chair would observe that there are a number of factors that contribute to this diversity of opinion, and that is the diversity of Virginia. And looking around the room, I see certain reminders of that. And I would just, for your consideration, remind you that in a lifetime, Virginia was transformed from a rural-dominated state to a suburban and urban-dominated state. A population of a couple of million and change after the Second World War, a cataclysmic event in which billions of dollars as part of the war effort were pumped into Virginia. A lot of them spent in Hopewell, munitions. Yeah. And the outlines of suburban-dominated Virginia began to emerge. Well, fast forward 80 years later, 2/3 of the people who lived in Virginia, lived in the countryside in 1945, 2/3 of the people who live in Virginia now live in cities and suburbs. The population is 8.6 million. The majority of Virginians are non-natives, are come-heres. I'd actually ask for a show of hands in the room. How many of you are, present company included, are non-natives, are come-heres? Okay, well, welcome to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Also, 42% of Virginians are Black, Asian, Hispanic, or indigenous, native peoples. This is a stew, a real salamaganda. It's a much more diverse place. How much of what you're seeing on grounds, again, UVA is our petri dish, do you think is a pushback to that diversity? And is there a line that can be drawn from that to, say, Clause 4 and the larger compact?
I mean, I'll take it. You talked about difference, too. I mean, when this university was created, it was all white male. I mean, we didn't have women until the 70s, and obviously we didn't have international students or students of color. I was here in '81. That was one of the first years we had a quota system that was created by the legislature, and that was an abysmal failure because they didn't support them, brought them here, but didn't do anything to make sure they could survive. So we've struggled with it. It's really kind of cool now for me to walk around the grounds and see so many people from everywhere and hear different languages and just see that we are now a university and not a college, right, of Virginia. So, I mean, how much of that changes? A lot. I mean, one of the things that people don't like, and I think we all can attest to this, is change. Change scares a lot of people. I say all of us. A lot of people don't like change, particularly when it comes at you and it's forced on you. You don't decide it for yourself. And that's what you start to get. You get pushback. Wait a minute, right? We don't want to hear all this. Wait a minute. You know, we don't like what you're saying. We don't like those protests. We don't like, the way you're saying it or the language you're saying it in. And that's, comes, I think, from most of, obviously, our fights over speech, fear. Fear of what the other person is saying, rather than just being able to take it. I tell my students in the last lecture, it's not what people call you. If they call you names or they say nasty things about you on, social media, it's how you react to it. Right? You can just dismiss it, not read it, not take it to heart, not have you, obviously, let it make you get upset, but literally just ignore it and go on and believe in yourself and your own values and what obviously political belief or religious belief, social belief that you obviously possess.
Mr. Alexander?
All right, it's just going to be boring if we agree with each other, so I'll stop doing that. The narrative you just alluded to, I totally get where that comes from, right? It's not brand new. It's been applied in various forms for a long time, since at least the civil rights movement. This notion that sort of our politics is being sorted, whether it's on campus or more generally in the nation, between people who are, who are just reacting adversely to change, to rising groups. So there's lots of language of that, votes for Trump are being driven by people who are losing status to these up-and-comers and so on. I must admit, I think that's really overrated. I don't find it particularly persuasive. I'm not saying it doesn't apply to anybody. I just don't find it useful as sort of the master template of what's going on here. I'll give you two quick reasons why. I could get more elaborate. I could think of more, but just in the interest of time. One, That narrative is really unhelpful for explaining why so many members of the new rising minority group seem perfectly content to vote for Trump and Republicans. I don't see how you could possibly use that framework to explain why they're doing what they're doing, unless we want to start, adding new categories to the, sociology of self-loathing whomevers, right? Secondly, it's true that a certain intolerance and censoriousness is coming out of sort of, Trumpy politics, but I must admit I see tons of censoriousness and intolerance emanating from people who are self-appointed advocates of all of this change in rising new demographics. I don't get how to reconcile those two things. So I just don't buy it as, the key to what's going on.
How about students? And both of you are come-heres. Well, no, excuse me, you're a Richmonder. I apologize.
Yeah.
From the holy city.
Yeah, I was originally from Nova, so I'm a transplant too.
The land of many dump trucks.
Yeah. I think I see Professor Alexander's point on a sort of nationwide scale. I think when we're looking at UVA specifically, and granted, I've only been here for 2 years, so I can't speak to past generations, but certainly from my perspective, at least from a higher level, it seems like a lot of this is at least ostensibly being driven by like the era of DEI and then the backlash to it. I mean, that was kind of at least that was sort of like the stated reason for President Ryan's resignation. And now that's sort of like the undercurrent throughout this new compact is trying to push back against what I think were a lot of the institutions for change, in the 2010s especially. So I would say that I think that sort of the changing demographics of Virginia at least have played a large part for UVA specifically.
Yeah, something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is whether there's this kind of change versus non-change or rising versus falling. And I'm going to be closer in line with Professor Alexander on this. I don't think that people view the world that way. I think they view it as we all kind of want the same things. We want to be respected. As students, we want to learn, and we want to feel like we're learning in an environment that values us. What we disagree with a lot.
Professors want to be sucked up too.
And you know what? Some students do too.
First and foremost.
But what we do see a lot is that people disagree about the way to get there. And I think this would kind of show a little bit of why we may see groups that, the political consensus would say shouldn't have voted for President Trump did. This is why we see some groups who would have been helped by what the Trump administration has called DEI policies say, we disagree with those because we think that they're disrespectful, or we think that they are not representative of my own skill. And so what I think is it's less this like us versus them, this up versus down, this left versus right, and it's more just a general disagreement about like what is the best way for me to get to a point where I'm going to be respected, where my views are going to be allowed, are going to be heard, where my skills are going to be valued. And I think that there's much less of a linear answer to that and much more of a everybody kind of has their own idea of that and they take actions accordingly.
On this question of diversity and a multi-hued student body and faculty, this certainly was part of this larger debate over hate speech on grounds, the Palestinian protests. I guess I would start with, what does one do with hate speech? Is it supposed to be regulated? Who defines what is hate speech? So I'd like you to address that. Maybe we'll start with Professor Moore.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the Supreme Court has declined to define it, so we know that they haven't told us what hate speech is. And hate speech basically is protected speech. Now, obviously, there are limits, and the limit is when it is obviously threatening somebody or it's a harassment. And that's the problem, isn't it? Because tonight, I think that was one of the questions. Where's the line? Well,
But there's been censorious behavior on the part of the administration. I mean, I remember all sorts of complaints about four-letter words on student protest signs and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Driving, shall we say, some deep-pocketed members of the benefactors community right round the bend.
It's interesting because I remember going to an event where President Ryan was talking about, he got all these letters about how awful it was that this speech was on a lawn room door. and how horrible it was. And he got all these emails about you should take it down, shame on you, right? This is a horrible look. And then when there was a big protest about Vice President Pence coming to grounds to speak, he got all these, and there was an article, I believe, in the Cav Daily saying he shouldn't come. And he got all these emails saying, he should be allowed to speak. There's free speech, there's free speech. He goes, and he kind of comically said, yeah, isn't it funny? Free speech just seems to me to be the speech you want to hear, right? And that's the
Well, in my line of
part.
business, someone once said, freedom of the press is reserved for those who own the presses.
That's right. Exactly right. So, yeah.
I think, I don't know that we needed to be told this, but I think one thing we found out in the last bunch of years is that human beings, every single one of us, we're not the most principled creatures. I don't know if you've noticed this, but we're very self-serving. We tend to want to hear what we want to hear. Most people seem to like being surrounded by people who broadly agree with them or share their values or worldview. And we really have a problem with agreeing to disagree, right? It's just not it's just among the things that are not our strong suits. And if you are concerned about, censoriousness and a willingness in the last, year, it seems like 4 years of the second Trump administration, but it's not like, it's only been like 9 months. And if you are concerned in that era about what sometimes seems like just this eagerness to lunge at regulating speech by others, firing people who seem to celebrate the assassination of Charlie Kirk, or wanting to regulate the kinds of things that faculty said about, October 7th, and so on and so forth. If that kind of thing concerns you, you ought to be concerned, but you also damn well should have been concerned under President Biden of the pressures of the federal government to try to get Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms to kick off or de-amplify people who were dissidents on the issues of the causes of COVID and treatment for COVID. And that, and if you say to yourself, and as I know some people do, that was about saving lives. Any argument can be made about saving lives. I can absolutely construe an argument that anybody who would celebrate the assassination of Charlie Kirk is posing a kind of, stochastic, terroristic danger to you. Anything can be twisted that way. Besides which, among the things that the government attempted under Biden to get social media companies to suppress was arguments that COVID had originated and spread internationally through a lab leak and not through marketplace practices. How the hell was that dangerous to human beings about where it came from? But they were trying to suppress that too. The fact is, every community politically contains people who cannot resist the urge to use power to silence their opponents. And it's just not what human beings are great at, resisting that impulse. And we ought to be concerned about it when it comes to hate speech as much as anything else, not because we like hate speech, not because we like lies, but because the only thing worse than people saying awful things is government trying to enforce people away from saying awful things.
Yeah, and I guess I would follow up, and I would get like the student's view on this. I mean, ultimately, don't we have to rely on our own, one hopes, informed judgment, as opposed to, someone with a blue pencil describe, Xing out what we can read or not?
So something that I think about on particularly the issue of hate speech is the reminder that the First Amendment doesn't exist to protect really popular and widely disseminated speech. Speech that everybody agrees with doesn't need to be protected. And unfortunately, in our history, there have been some very good ideas that have been very, very unpopular. I mean, we live in Virginia. I think that most, hopefully all, people in this room would agree that many of the ideas held by the founders of this state and of this university held ideas that were abhorrent. But those ideas were also grossly unpopular in the voting population of Virginia. That is why it is important that we protect those unpopular views. The consequence of doing that is that we also need to protect the other side. We also need to protect abhorrent views. And the reason for that is if we don't, somebody has to, like Professor Alexander said, somebody has to take the pencil and write which speech is and isn't abhorrent. I mean, we see it today on the left and the right. There are popular opinions of Democrats that claim that Republican ideas dehumanize people. Republicans say the same thing about Democratic ideas. Both sides really would love for the other side to just kind of shut up on those issues. But that's not how we get progress, right? So rather than say, oh, we should limit here, we should limit here, the courts have given us a great way to limit it. We are a state institution. We can limit speech when it directly incites violence, when it's fighting words, and when it's libelous. That is when we can limit that speech. Any limit beyond that coming from the government gives the government the ability to go back to what we were doing. And that's to limit very good but unpopular speech. Because if there comes a day again when very good things are again unpopular, those good things should still be able to be spread.
I'm sorry to intervene one more time. Sorry to step on your toes here. The idealistic version of this argument is the one you just articulated, which is, I mean, if I can put words a little bit in your mouth. The reason,
You're sucking up.
Yeah, sucking up to a student. This makes no sense, right? But in this case, the idealistic version would be something like, look, you've got to tolerate minority or unpopular views because you never know when you might learn from them. You have to tolerate what is the quote on old Cabell Hall, that we shouldn't be afraid of error so long as reason is left free to combat it. The idea that is that by pitting ideas against each other, that we work our way towards progress and the accumulation of knowledge. That's the idealistic version. I am trying to be a little bit menacing here in telling you what the less idealistic version is. It's not that we might learn something from views there might be views we're not going to learn anything from. I'm very open to that possibility. There are lots of views I don't expect to learn anything from. But the danger is this, all right? So let me put it in sort of more frank political terms. For the last at least 20 years, calls for hate speech, the regulation of so-called hate speech, bigoted speech along racial and ethnic and religious and otherwise, has come primarily from some, by no means all, not even most, but some liberal and progressive intellectuals. And I could point to a whole bunch of books that could express that if you want me to. Any liberal or progressive who's sympathetic to that project should remind themselves of one thing and one thing only. Whatever law they craft is going to be the one that comes out of an actual Congress populated by real people, not an idealistic flow from their pen, right? Real human beings elected to office who are grandstanding for their voters, throwing them red meat. That's who's going to write that law. And it won't stay exactly the way it was written or interpreted on day one. It's going to mutate over time in administration after administration. And if you're a liberal or progressive who's at least vaguely sympathetic to that, sooner or later, Attorney General Pam Bondi and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, at least recently, or, hey, there's still time, another 3 years for Attorney General Matt Gaetz to get his hands on it. It's not going to always be run by the people you want to run it. So be really careful what power you put in their hands.
But you already have those laws, too. You have anti-discrimination laws.
Yeah.
So my feeling is I don't know that they were calling for new laws and new restrictions that, but instead to enforce Title VI, Title IX.
Can I get a dig in there?
Sure.
I think
Well-
Sophia had a word.
Sorry, I run.
Now you've gotten me started.
That's good. That's good.
I mean, I think it sounds like all of us agree on the fact that hate speech should be protected speech, because even if it's not always an ideal way to spread views, or it's still, the alternative to it is much, much worse. I would say within a university context, though, I think we should protect hate speech, because at the end of the day, the government should not be the one getting to decide which views are and are not allowed. That's what happens as soon as you stop protecting hate speech. I think that you do have to recognize that that protecting this freedom of speech, as protecting many freedoms does, comes with a cost, and I think that's often students feeling accepted at the university. For instance, I think you could probably see on both sides during Israel-Palestine protests, students having actual instances of hate speech against them and feeling very unwelcome on campus. I think this is a big case where universities should issue institutional statements, should put their support behind groups who are feeling unwelcome, but at the end of the day, should not limit the freedom of the sort of agitating groups to speak their minds, because any hate speech law, no matter how sort of popular it might seem, ultimately is determined, how it's enforced is determined by the government. Hopefully most of us would agree in we shouldn't promote Nazi ideology. Does the government decide whether, defacing an Israeli flag is hate speech under that, or whether it's political action? But I do think we need to consider sort of backup mechanisms of how universities can support students who are feeling the effects of hate speech without actually limiting that speech itself.
I yield to the Solicitor General.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to jump off a point Ms. Peretti made and address one Mr. Alexander made. The issue of the Israel-Palestine debate. I'm sorry, I don't buy the issue that this is simply a liberals want to censor speech and conservatives don't. And I think that debate is a really clear example of why. Right? We have a lot of people on the right who are attempting to legislate away genuine criticisms of the Israeli state. And their means for doing this is claiming that essentially any real and actionable criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. Right? There are people who are criticizing Israel who are anti-Semitic, but we are seeing actual steps taken in multiple state legislatures to ban certain speech that is critical of Israel, to stop allowing certain tax breaks for nonprofits that are criticizing Israel. I'm sorry, I see the right doing the exact same thing that the left is doing, and I think it's bad both ways.
I would observe, and then I'm eager to open the floor to questions and get your thoughts, that compounding this problem is also this exponential expansion, of the media spectrum, if you will, the democratization of what is supposed to be information. And I say this as a retired news guy, but that ever-expanding media spectrum is also now increasingly narrowly sliced. And more often than not, people are turning to sources of information, note the air quotes, that tend to confirm their prejudices rather than challenge them. And a shared experience, if you will, in consuming news is greatly diminished. There was a time not long ago that, Americans spent part of their evening watching one of 3 or 4 evening newscasts that tended to be, similar in content and structure, and serious-minded. And there were newspapers that were granular in their focus on what was going on in the town or county in which you lived, and national publications, be it the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. This can only aggravate this problem. And I just like to introduce it as the wild card, not the trump card, the wild card in our discussions. Can we hold that a sec?
Yeah, of course.
This is your evening, and I'm hoping that you'll keep the panel on its collective toes. We have microphones on the right and
If
the
anyone
left.
has a question, just raise your hand, and Mr. Crossman or I will come find you. Let's start down here.
And if you would identify yourselves and also to whom you are directing a question or questions.
Hello, I'm Rohini. I'm a second year at the university. I major in commerce and politics.
stand up,
Lovely,
please?
stand up. I'm part of Jeff's talk, but I had a specific question for the entire panel. As a double politics major and as well as someone in the Jefferson Society, I've had the great privilege of being able to have civil discourse, to fundamentally disagree with people that I'm very close with on a large variety of issues. I've noticed that doesn't really happen if you're not in these circles. So how does a normal student who isn't involved in politics,
Hang on, is not involved, that doesn't occur if you're not in which circles?
in either being a politics major where these discussions are happening in
You're
real
not
time,
a cool kid.
or in one of these groups like the Washington
Yes,
or Jefferson Debating Society that actually focus on proliferating these ideals.
Yeah.
How can students who aren't in these circles engage with civil discourse and be able to represent those ideals of the university?
Well, first of all, there's, I think, always ways to get involved. I have a lot of friends who participate in middle grounds, which is and from my understanding, pretty much anyone can get involved at the start of each semester. There are constantly, I think, a lot of talks hosted at the university. Professor Alexander can probably speak more to that, presenting different viewpoints. But I think probably the biggest change that needs to be made is sort of a change in the daily culture, of how students talk to each other. I've noticed at least very anecdotal evidence, but students being afraid to speak their mind either because they're afraid of the social repercussions or because they just don't feel like they are educated enough on a topic. For the first point, I'd like to encourage everyone, if you have an opinion, please share it. I think that's you can't always necessarily predict how others are going to react, but only by being the one to take the first step can we actually start a culture where people are more comfortable talking about difficult issues. And for the second point about, at least something that I feel a lot, is that I don't speak up on an issue unless I feel like I really know all of the talking points and I am well versed in it. That's part of the great part about sharing your idea, is that you get to talk to other people. They probably have great perspectives that even if you had known everything about an issue, you would never have considered. So if you're passionate about something, don't feel like you necessarily have to be an expert at it to start a dialogue.
I think a good step one is put down your phone. I think we have a tendency, especially in our generation, to kind of turn to things like social media and turn to like I'm sorry, Yik Yak is not a good source of political discourse, guys. It's just not. But what I really mean is like, look to your friends, look to your roommates, look to your family, look to the people around you, because I promise that you can find something you disagree with any person in this world. And if you're talking to me, you'll probably disagree with a lot. But really, just talk to people. You don't have to have a formal debate. You don't have to have a formal event. Like, the way we get comfortable talking to people is having conversations. I think my rowing coach is ready to punch me in the face if I bring up politics again before practice. But me and my teammates have had some good conversations, right? And that, to me, is the answer to this. It's not things like formal debate. It's not things like formal events. Events like this are great to get conversations started. But that's all it does, is it gets it started. Like, our job going forward is to keep talking to one another. And that also means recognizing that, you know, if you really disagree with someone you really care about, they're the same person they were before you knew they had that view. And keep talking to them, keep learning from them, and rather than yelling at somebody, just get a cup of coffee with them or something and talk.
I just kind of refine the question. What about within faculty circles? Is there a chill descending in the lounge as well? I mean, are you experiencing as peers in the groves of academe, you know, some of these tensions and frictions and these off-putting moments with greater frequency now than, say, 30 years ago?
I'm tempted to say, depends on who you are. I'm sure some people are self-censoring more now, but some of us others had to be really careful 20 years ago, too. So it all depends on who, right? To your point more broadly, first of all, not everyone is going to be willing to have conversations, right? They're just people who, at this moment of history, maybe always, but definitely right now, they're just not in a tolerant place. And I think personally, if I can, I hate slapping medical labels on something, on anything political, but I'm tempted to do in a case like this. There are a lot of people who these days engage in catastrophizing. If you disagree with me on this issue, you must be, and then end the sentence, supporting genocide, immoral, bigoted, whatever it might be, hateful. And it's just this leap to assuming the worst possible motivations on the part of others, right? And it is not universal. It really is important. It just seems that way sometimes. There are people who really are like that. You're probably not going to be able to have exchanges with them. You might have to search elsewhere for it, but I absolutely agree with both of you. There's a lot of that out there if you're looking for it. The Center for Politics runs a ton of programming that invites conversation on a huge range of topics. Middle Ground and other student organizations do the same. There is no way I'm not going to talk about the Blue Ridge Center, right? So for example, later this month, you're going to hand out these cards before you leave tonight on not the First Amendment or freedom of speech and hate speech, but the First Amendment or freedom of speech and a different argument for regulating speech, misinformation. We hold events we've held debates here's one way I run debates. I invite one person who has a strong view on some controversial topic and ask them, who should I invite as your sparring partner? Who's someone you know that you've had fruitful, not snarky exchanges with? Almost every one of those people can produce a friend or someone that they've been on TV with or whatever, who's actually someone that they can have a frank conversation with. We've done that on abortion, on, help me here, anyone who remembers.
Tariffs.
We have a tariff one coming up. We've had industrial policy since the second Trump administration. What's that? On H-1B visas, presciently. We have an upcoming one on racial preferences in college admissions, the tariffs one. And those are about nothing but showing that two people can really vigorously disagree, sometimes to the point where they're shaking in anger, without but be able to go out for a drink afterwards. If you can get along with someone who supports the team you hate the most, a friendship can transcend disagreement even on some hot button issue. It's not what defines each of you or you together.
Hey, my name's Diego. I have a question specifically for Professor Alexander, but anyone on the panel is welcome to opine.
You take it.
I wanted to ask or get into a little bit more detail on your position of the government encouraging censorship of misinformation, specifically on COVID-19. I'm curious, I guess, how much of a free speech absolutist position you have on this. So say the death rate for COVID-19 had been 90% or 85%, say it was having the same effect on the US that the Black Death had on Europe during the Middle Ages. Would you still hold to the same position that the government shouldn't encourage censorship of that misinformation? And if you think that that isn't a cost that we would be willing to bear, then how would you respond to the argument that the costs for the actual COVID-19 pandemic were already incredibly high, that we had over 1 million deaths, and that bearing that cost was unacceptable?
That line of argument would make a lot of sense except for one thing. You're assuming something really important, which is that somebody, some group, is going to know which beliefs about the causes or ways of mitigating COVID-19, what those were and what the wrong ones were. Is that how it happened? Really? Or, in fact, were the people who insisted that they knew from the best and try to suppress contrary views sometimes turn out to be wrong about key elements of this? So before you decide that these are the truths and we should be able to regulate disagreement because we're trying to save lives, boy, are you confident that you know which policies will save lives and which ones will cost them, because imagine if you're wrong. Now that could be catastrophic. Talk about you could be the agent of the mass death, not the one trying to stop it. So be really, really careful. My advice, let the clash of opinions work itself through, if you're really trying to save lives.
Professor Moore? Oh, did you...
Hi, my name is Katie Watson. I kind of wanted to revisit, one of Mr. Sioka's earlier points about the distinction between K-12 education and university education. I kind of wanted to investigate from the whole panel whether you guys view a difference between K-12 education and universities, and is it meaningful, what does that look like, and how does that impact potentially institutional neutrality in a K-12 school versus in a university?
Yeah, I think there's a definite difference, and anybody's a parent, or those of you may remember, right, when you were in elementary school, if your teacher told you something, you did it, right, you believed it, you're impressionable, you're very impressionable. The courts have said as much at that age, right, and so the school has basically a duty to protect them from being brainwashed or having just, one side, obviously. Same reason we don't want religion, right, just pushed on these students at that age. Now, you get here to college, you're an adult. We treat you like an adult, you should be an adult. So I think that obviously that game changes, but I do think there's a major difference between K through 12 and higher education.
One sentence, this is going to sound like a joke, but it's not. The fact that students at some high rate, whatever it is, believe that they can get a better grade by sucking up to what their professor agrees with, knows that they're capable of making the distinction between what their professor thinks and what the truth might be. The fact that they're gaming it means they already have some critical distance of their own to work with. It is very different. You're right.
This chap in the UVA hat in the front. Yes.
You already have the microphone.
I think your mic is off.
Hi, my name is Sean. This is a question for the panel as a whole. Recently, the Cav Daily reported that the compact would include screening for international students, whether they align with American values. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's nothing more un-American than the government deciding what is and isn't American. I'd like to give you more detail, but it's that simple.
By the way, I would note that international students, particularly for Virginia public universities, particularly the in-demand Virginia public universities, the University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, to some degree George Mason and VCU, certainly the College of William and Mary. These are, as one college president said some years ago, gold nuggets. They mean an enormous amount of income to the university, not just dollars, the maximum number of dollars paid in terms of tuition and fees, but often what they bring in the way of research dollars from their home states, and I'm not talking about North Carolina. So there's a business issue that's very closely associated with attracting international students that I don't know if it really gets much attention. It's certainly been subordinated to the notion that international students somehow have a poisonous presence on campus.
That's true only of Canadians.
I think there's also a very big difference between foreign governments. You know, a lot of times they will like sponsor a professorship and kind of be able to influence what faculty member is appointed to that position. That's very different, and the compact does outline limitations on that. But that's very different than a foreign student not affiliated with their government being discriminated against because of potentially anti-American views. From my understanding, and Professor Moore maybe can correct me on this, that's not technically a First Amendment violation because they're not in the United States, but it certainly doesn't sit right with me that we allow viewpoint that that the federal government is actively encouraging universities to engage in sort of discrimination based on political affiliation and viewpoint for any of their students.
Excellent. What's so frightening about that? Who's going to decide what's American and what's not? Or what's belittling to America and what's not? And that's the part that's chilling and frightening to me, that the government's going to tell us what obviously is American, patriotic, not patriotic, is just so contrary to what the First Amendment stands for. It's just frightening to even think it was a thought.
Good evening, I'm Tim. My question relates to the moderator's last point before the Q&A started. So the fairness doctrine was a policy enforced by the FCC until 1987 that mandated broadcasters had to present both sides of specific important topics. Does the panel see a modified version of this realistic and something that could help curb polarizing news? Or do we think that's too much of a restriction on free speech?
Does anyone know when it was when was the fairness doctrine dropped or reversed?
During Reagan's?
Huh?
It was Reagan, I thought.
Okay. That early?
Late
Okay.
70s, early 80s.
Early
It was
80s.
basically considered unenforceable.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
Did you? I would only say this. Having been in the news business for a long time, there is and this is not always evident, but there is certainly within professional, committed news organizations, usually a continuing effort. There's sort of internal friction to try to get multiple sides of the story. And I'm the first to admit that that is often an area in which the press falls short. One of my concerns about where we are in terms of sharing information, arguably, we're in the bit of a throwback. We have through digital, through cable news, news that is peddled with a point of view. That was very much the rule in American media up until the early part of the 20th century, a point I made visiting with a class earlier today. Mass circulation in American newspapers were adjuncts. They were the arms of political parties. It's no accident that the morning newspaper in Tallahassee, Florida is called the Democrat. Ditto, now shuttered, the Springfield Republican in Massachusetts. It wasn't really until the 20th century, as the news business sort of professionalized, that we kind of got out of the racket of selling news with a point of view. Mind you, that is an enduring feature of media elsewhere. United Kingdom, all across Asia. People buy certain newspapers, and by the way, the print iteration of newspapers, still very popular abroad, because those newspapers are presenting the news with a particular point of view.
Professor Moore might know more about this than I do. It'd be hard to know less. That if memory serves, the Fairness Doctrine only applied to forms of media that were directly licensed by the federal government, right, on the grounds that there was limited spectrum, and this therefore it applied, to my knowledge, only to television and to licensed television and radio stations. So it never applied to print newspapers, and I don't see why it would apply to anything on the internet. So my guess is, even if it were revived in its classic form, I don't know.
But kind of as a former Virginia governor might say, relative to Doug Wilder, one of his favorite flourishes. Relative to that was also the question of cross-ownership. And there were serious restrictions in not every market, but most markets, that a company that owned a newspaper couldn't own a television station.
To try to deconsolidate or...
The idea was to sort of, just kind of break things up, keep,
multiple points of view.
Well, now we have more points of view than ever through social media, and I don't know if democracy is that much better off for it.
Yeah. And that's, in the contrary, that's the niche, echo chambers that you weren't.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's a term that I've used myself. We have a question up front. Oh, no, excuse me. Yes.
That's right.
Hi, thank you all for being here. I have a question. I think a lot of students...
You are...
My name's Eli, yes.
Are you in the Federal Witness Protection Program?
No, my name's Eli Weinger. I'm a fourth-year Baden student. Is that enough, or do you want...
That's great.
Okay.
Social Security. No.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't need that.
Yeah.
Just the spelling of your last name.
A fellow member of the tribe, in case you couldn't tell. So I think a lot of students are looking in on all these decisions the Board of Visitors is making about the compact, about a new president, and it doesn't even seem like we're involved, like we can't even know what's going on. And so to that extent, at the last board meeting, a lot of students came out and protested, myself included, and I went on the steps of the rotunda to make an announcement. I got about 3 steps up before police officers started pushing me off the steps of the rotunda, didn't provide a reason, didn't provide a code section I was in violation of, just said, you need to move, and started pushing me. And I wonder, if that's all we glean from what the Board of Visitors is, they talk about being true to the university's values. Do you all think that, that and what the Board of Visitors has been doing is true to the university's values, or a deviation from it?
Something I think is interesting is that the Board of Visitors is very intentionally political appointees. Right? They're meant to be representative of the people of Virginia through the election of our governor. I think a very easy step that should be taken if you disagree with the actions of the current Board of Visitors is go vote. We do have the ability to remove members of the board if we fundamentally disagree with them. The state of Virginia disagrees with the Board of Visitors, they can vote someone else in for governor, and they can remove those members and they can appoint new ones. To the point that you made, thank you for sharing your story about speech on the lawn. I think it's important to remember that while the government does hold time, place, and manner restrictions and the ability to limit speech to when it can be given, where it can be given, and how it can be given, the goal of the university, in my mind, should be to facilitate as much speech as possible without putting people's safety at risk. That should be the line of where action is taken. I find it hard to believe, at least if what you told me is in fact what happened, that you were posing an imminent risk to the Board of Visitors. I think that speech should be permitted. But I do disagree with the idea that we don't have actions we can take. Right? We have an election right now. We have one candidate who has spoken in support of the current Board of Visitors. We have one candidate who's been exceptionally critical. Every student in Virginia who is a student at the University of Virginia can vote in the state of Virginia. If they disagree with it, please go vote.
May I make a point about university governance? And I say this as sort of a state government nerd. The Virginia system of higher education management is truly unique. And there's a reason for it, and it has a lot to do with the selection of personalities that we have here. There are roughly 14 senior 4-year institutions, public institutions in Virginia. They are governed by boards of visitors who are appointed by the governor, subject to the confirmation of the General Assembly. Now, if you look at the terms to which these BOV members are appointed, they're staggered. And the reason they are staggered is because, well, the guiding principle was that the governor and the General Assembly that in league make these appointments, that no one governor, no one General Assembly could dominate the management of a public university in Virginia. And this brings us back to our business here this evening, and that is the independence and the unique personalities of each of these institutions. If Virginia had a system of centrally controlled higher education, much as there is in my home state, New York, in California, which has some of the finest public universities in the country, in Virginia, it wouldn't be the Virginia Military Institute, it would be the University of Virginia at Lexington. There'd be a one-size-fits-all approach, or certainly a closer approximation to that, if we did not have this unique, truly distinct to Virginia system of running our schools. And this is one of the great concerns about the Board of Visitors at this university presently, as well as at the Virginia Military Institute, which forced out, through a number of quick appointments to the Board of Visitors by this governor, forced out the Institute's first black superintendent. And at George Mason University, which has a Board of Visitors because it is not fully constituted, in part because of political gamesmanship, and let's call it that, by the Democrats who control the legislature to basically prevent the firing of George Mason's first black president. This is now a matter of litigation. This is what we are seeing, certainly in Virginia, our university campuses as legal and political battlegrounds. It is probably not unique, but I think it's safe to say that in Virginia, for some reason, we seem to be experiencing this up close. So I only note that for the record. That's a complicating factor here, and I yield.
I just want to say thank you, Eli, for not letting the forces chill, right? Your desire to go out and protest. That is what the University of Virginia is supposed to be about. Time, place, and manner, like Jackson said, is a reality, but that's a reality only that is to limit conduct, not your speech, not wanting to obviously observe. And if the conduct is not a threat, right, to others or to the university, then obviously it's to be tolerated. So yay for you, and don't let that obviously keep you from wanting to go back out.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Nora. I'm a fourth year. I'm also an intern for the Center for Politics, but my views don't represent theirs. So my question is for everyone, but mainly for Professor Alexander. You talked about the Biden administration attempting to expel misinformation about the origins of COVID-19 off of certain social media platforms, but I think that completely overlooks the harmful rhetoric that misinformation led to, that then caused a spike in hate crimes against Asians and Asian Americans in the US. And is that not a direct and explicit stipulation of when hate speech should be expelled, like you guys stated, when it is inciting violence?
No. First of all, there is a certain defense to truth. I gather most experts have concluded since 2020 that the single most likely explanation for the origin and major spread, interurban spread within China of COVID, is that it leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, right? So if it's true, I'm not really that concerned about who may have interpreted it in this way or that way. If it's true, we really probably need to know that. So at one level, I don't care who interpreted it how. If it really is true, then we probably ought to know it and talk about it and investigate it more and think about it more. Secondly, I think it's really hard to go from people having a discussion about, the literal genetic coding of the virus and how to think about its evolution and why it may well have come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, to concluding that inspired specific people to commit. That is not how incitement laws work. That a conversation held in one area about one thing, which was, by the way, often conducted in terms of why this was the fault of the Chinese Communist Party regime, not a Chinese American living in Arizona And so those are just two, it seems to me, profoundly separated things. I am not a lawyer, but I find it hard to believe that we want to start regulating so far upstream of a given crime that we regulate huge swathes of claims, even if they're true, if they might have been interpreted by someone not closely related to that statement at the other end. That's just, imagine going down that road. And if you insist on going down that road on that issue, I'm going to fill room after room of people who propose to go after all sorts of other speech. How many statements made by the Students for Justice in Palestine could be accused of having led to the shooting, the stabbings in Manchester or the shooting somewhere else? Do we really want to start doing that? Because that's going to get really repressive really fast, right? Everyone's going to want in on that way to punish their adversaries. Yeah, please.
Sorry? Yeah, I mean, I guess my, kind of looking at it going, I do think that the problem is people are watching and they see this, and it's all this conspiracy. It's back to the social media. I mean, they take information out there and this misinformation, and I don't know what's true. You don't know what's true. And so, and you have people who don't have an education like we do, looking at it day after day after day, and they feed on it, and then next year they're angry, right? They're angry because, China sent us this virus, and they take it out on everyone. Now, is that right? No. But is that what we saw, what happens? Yes. So how do we, now getting to the point of how do we then regulate speech because of that? That's a whole nother monster. And, again, it's above my pay grade. How do we stop this misinformation? Censorship, not for it at all. Same time, misinformation, it's got to stop. I mean, it's just crazy. We're talking about the days when we used to have 3 stations, right? And all they did was talk about the facts, right? This was the news. It wasn't, now if you watch a cable channel, they'll just, bash Trump this, Trump that, Trump this, Trump that. And the other one is, Biden this, Biden that, Biden that. You just know what you're going to see without even, having to worry. That's not what I want to hear. I want the news. I want the facts. I want to make up my mind, and you don't see that. So, sorry, kind of went off on a tangent.
Did you all have anything you wanted to add there?
I mean, I think that Professor Alexander is right, that if we say that, speech of one inherently leads to violence of the other, when the one didn't mention violence, didn't call for violence, didn't make any statement against any American, that's really dangerous, because the reality is, my argument for those incidents of hate crimes against Asian Americans is there's probably some very severe underlying issues with the people who perpetrated those horrible crimes, and we should probably focus on addressing that. Any speech can result in, immense acts of violence. I mean, I believe somebody committed a murder from the song Helter Skelter. Like that doesn't mean that song incited that murder, but they directly said that song incited that murder. We should focus on the issue of violence as a separate issue to the fact that we need to address misinformation. And I will fully and 100% agree that we should address misinformation. But like Professor Alexander said, the case of the origins of COVID was very likely not misinformation that was being censored.
How much hip hop would have been banned in the 80s and 90s if we had fought? There were tons of people saying it leads to misogyny, it's leading to abuse of women, it's leading to crime. How much of it would have been banned if that's how we approached it?
We have our own president saying that leftists, right, radicals are creating, murders.
Guess if I agree with him.
Yeah.
I wanted to also just jump off Professor Moore's point. I think that we don't see censorship actually leading to a meaningful change in opinion and change in outcomes. For instance, I'll use Germany as my example. In the Weimar Republic, they banned a lot of Nazi speech that obviously did not work out so well. And then post-World War II, they again banned a lot of sort of Nazi talking points, but then you've seen a rise of far-right extremism now through the AfD there that closely mirrors a lot of at least hateful and far-right ideologies. I think when we think about potentially limiting speech, it's usually the idea that you want to limit someone's freedom so that you can promote equality for the whole populace. In this case, what we're seeing, if you talk about censorship, is a limit in someone's freedom without the resulting tangible benefit of equality or actual change in how much hate persists in a society. I think especially now that hate can travel so pervasively and so immediately through social media. There's just not really a good way to regulate it. So we might as well maintain freedom.
I'm mindful of the time. I think we have a 9 p.m., hard 9 p.m. finish. Perhaps we can get another question in, or maybe two. Yes.
Hi, my name is Reese. I'm a fourth year in the college. Thanks so much for the panel. It seems like everyone agrees that maybe legal regulations related to speech are bad, but there might be some more disagreement on like how we should, like what the norms and culture of free speech at the university should be. Like how should we act in order to promote a culture of free speech? Like on the one hand, I don't want my friends to write essays because they're scared that their teacher might grade them poorly. But on the other hand, like I don't want people to come to the university who will make my friends feel like they don't belong. So I'm interested if the panel has thoughts on just like what a good framework of tolerance might be. Should I tolerate disagreement, and to what extent should I tolerate disagreement? And what does that like look like as like a university student navigating the world?
Well, the professors to whom we are all sucking up,
Yeah.
I mean, what would you recommend?
I mean, you're not the first person to use the word culture tonight, and I think that's exactly the way we ought to think about this. It sounds so, puny to say that these are decisions we make in our communities about how to conduct ourselves, how to act towards each other, whether to act intolerantly or censoriously, whether to make every disagreement a kind of huge moral conflict and the end of the world or not. But I think that's the level at which this happens, that there are just communities. You referred to this earlier, that there's sub-communities you found on grounds where people seem to, be very comfortable with disagreement, and ones where it's less present. Those are, in a way, choices. And I think we should be more deliberate about that and more thoughtful about it. And I know that sounds so tiny, but I think those are our best tools.
And I would say, too, I see it as my role, too, to encourage every student, right, to feel comfortable, to say to me, if what they disagree with, or to listen to other people, and if they don't agree with you, to not immediately, demonize that person, but to learn how to disagree. I mean, one of the things you learn in law school,
It's a muscle.
Yeah, it is a muscle, and learning both sides, and I make my constitutional law class argue both sides, the sides they don't agree with, right, because it helps you understand what you believe in if you, obviously put yourself in the shoes of somebody else, and obviously see their position, right, from obviously their mindset.
There's another faculty member here who builds one of her courses entirely around getting students to argue both sides of an issue, which is just a good muscle to develop, right?
Yeah, can I just say one thing real quick? To your earlier question, we've got all kinds of activities that we're ramping up through Think Again, which Professor Alexander, when he started Blue Ridge Center, we started Think Again. We worked together a lot. We've got Disagree with a Professor, October 17th, outdoors, free food, in front of Peabody Hall. Come at lunchtime, no kale salads will be served.
Woohoo!
We've got oratory contests coming up. We'd love to have all of you compete $1,000 prize this year in honor of
She is
Mary Kate Carey, and she teaches she has taught in the politics department, and she was on the
The other thing, while you guys are probably on your way here, Rachel Sheridan, the head of the board of visitors, sent out an email to all faculty and students tonight with the wording of the compact and asking, what do you like about it, what do you don't like about it? So they're asking for everyone's opinions. And we heard a lot about some of the First Amendment stuff tonight, but there's stuff in there that's not First Amendment, that is, holding tuition for 5 years at the same rate, or UVA being test optional for the SAT, things like that that are not First Amendment. They'd love to hear your opinions, so when you go home, check your emails because they're asking for your opinions.
Mary Kay Kelly, correct?
Carey, yeah.
Carey,
Yep.
formerly of the Department of Politics.
Right.
Okay. For those of
I
you who
want to hear
don't
from
know.
the professor. We have a professor down here, too. We have to take the last question, or next to the last. She can go.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Isabel. I'm a second-year student in the college. And this is kind of similar to the last question that was asked, but almost more on a macroscopic scale. So I think a lot of us agree that the government shouldn't directly regulate speech, but there's this other kind of perhaps equally as important of idea is that a lot of people believe that their primary power comes from their ability to apply collective social pressure, whether that's boycotting a company or people saying you shouldn't date someone who has controversial political beliefs. And like historically, many businesses have responded to collective social power. So if the government can't regulate what you say, your peers can through social pressure. There's that idea. So that's just something that's very natural. I think it's always existed, and I don't think it's ever going to stop existing. And it almost seems as much of a concern to the Trump administration with his attacks on quote-unquote woke culture. So even if the government can't regulate specific speech, do they have a responsibility or the power to shape that culture? Do schools have that responsibility or power? And so just generally, whose responsibility is it, and how do we actually effectively manage that culture?
It's ours. And I'll give you a really good example. We've mentioned hate speech a lot tonight. And I think that when we are very intentional in intentionally engaging with people with those abhorrent views, we can change those views. I'll give you an example. One of my heroes is a man named Daryl Davis. I'll give you a very brief overview. He's a black man who befriends members of the KKK. To date, he has convinced 300 members of the KKK to give up their robes. They have given him those robes, and several of them have become advocates of racial justice. They did not make that change because of censorship. They didn't make it because of social pressure. The only social pressure that there was him sitting in front of them and asking them a simple question. Why do you hate me if you don't even know me? That's all he asked. And several of those people that he spoke to found that they couldn't answer that question. So it is our responsibility. The university can't do it. But when we look at stories like that, and we look at how people are able to change minds by engaging in what are probably very uncomfortable and very difficult conversations, the views that those men held prior to talking to him were abhorrent, they were evil. But they didn't. He is a phenomenal jazz pianist, and that to me is the answer to those abhorrent views. It's conversation and it's being intentional. He said, I don't understand this, so rather than saying I should shun them, I should ignore them, he said, I will go talk to them.
Uno más.
Thank you so much. I'm Jim Todd. I taught a wide variety of courses for the politics department, American government and constitutional law. And to add to my impressive credentials, I pushed Larry Sabato's TV around in 1983 when I was his teaching assistant. I'm an honorary member of the Jefferson Society and so proud to be. And I would like to just clear up a few things. The real problem here is it's already 9 o'clock. This is the first time I've had a class to talk to in 4 years. I will try to restrain myself. But at the start of this, you brought up fire in a crowded theater. And all my teaching career, I railed against the fact that people leave one important word out of that. You have a right to yell fire in a crowded theater if it's on fire.
Yeah.
You don't have a right to yell fire falsely in a crowded theater. And that's what Justice Holmes was trying to get to in his decision. I said Gidlow, which one was it, Sherry? It's back in 1917 or something.
Yeah, it was Gidlow.
Yeah, and Schenck, it was Schenck versus yes, I think. Either one of them. But anyhow, the courts started grappling with this question of what's permissible and what isn't long ago, over 100 years ago. And one of the things Holmes put together was the idea that speech could be regulated, even though it says Congress shall make no law. They didn't really mean that. Speech can be regulated if it presents a clear and present danger. Well, Holmes almost immediately regretted the use of that term, and he started emphasizing the need for the danger to be imminent. So Professor Alexander, is misleading information presenting an imminent danger to the survival of our democracy? I don't know, but I just want you all to have some background about the First Amendment and the fact that this discussion has been going on a very long time. And once you decide that you're going to allow some limitations on it,
come speak.
How do you do that? And how do you make it so that it doesn't overreach?
And with that important footnote to the evening's proceedings, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our moderator.